So, Shalom, this is Reverend John Ferret, and we are in Lesson 53 in the continuing series, The Gospel According to Moses in the Book of Exodus. Now, in Lesson 53, we're going to focus in on Exodus chapter 22, verses 1 through 15. Now, as we've learned in Lesson 52, these laws are coming after the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are in Exodus 20. And Dennis Prager, I've mentioned him a number of times. He is a key academic, scholarly resource that I use. He has a Torah commentary that's called the Rational Bible, and it comes out of his audio series. And in his audio series, which is just amazing. Now again, Dennis Prager is not a Christian, but definitely he did Torah commentary, not only for those who practice Judaism, the Jewish people that are obviously in his synagogue and the Jewish people in general, but for Christians as well. We share the same Bible, the same Old Testament. So he wants to help Jew and Gentile alike, those who practice Judaism and those who practice Christianity alike, to understand the Torah and understand God's instruction. Now, he suggests that God seems to be telling us that great principles, the Ten Commandments, for instance, are 10 great principles. They're not enough. They're not enough to live a righteous life before the Lord. Things need to be given more detail. Now, we addressed this in previous lessons and in Lesson 52. And Jesus, Yeshua, God, his teachings are a great example. So, Jesus talks about adultery in Matthew 5, verses 27 through 29, where he says, "You've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I say." Now, that format is typical as found in rabbinic teachings and rabbinic writings. The format that has the two key phrases. The phrase is, "You've heard it said," and the second phrase is, "But I say." Now, you will find this among other rabbis in Judaism. So Jesus is saying, "You've heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I say." Now, he's not doing away with the great principle of do not commit adultery. He's simply enhancing our understanding of this commandment. It's one thing to commit the act of adultery, but the act itself was precipitated by something that came before. This is what Jesus is saying. Yeah, don't commit adultery, but there are things you need to avoid beforehand. So when we take a look at Commandment 7, there's more. God wants to give us more detail to enhance and expand our understanding about this commandment. So what is Jesus warning us? Don't look at a woman to lust after her. Avoid this. Do not have your mind and eyes set or to dwell on the physical beauty of a woman. It is this that can lead to the breaking of the seventh commandment. And it's the same thing here. So let's take a look and get into the word immediately. So let's read Exodus 22, verses 2 through 4. "If the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account." Now let me just stop here real quick. In the Hebrew is, if a thief is caught while tunneling into your home. That's what it says in Hebrew. The implication of that Hebrew phrase, as you take a look at that phrase here and in other places that it appears, is not only is the thief breaking in by tunneling, sneaking in, but more than likely he's doing this at night. The night is, you might say, the tunnel. So another way of actually reading this is, if the thief is caught while breaking into your home at night and is struck so that he dies, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. But if the sun has risen on him In other words, he can be seen. There will be blood guiltiness on his account, which means the owner. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If what he stole is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. Now, the Lord has given us a great principle in the 6th commandment: do not murder. Not only that, do not steal. And do not murder this is not accidental killing. This is killing with intent. So a thief is breaking into your house during the night, and what God is saying, if you kill the thief intentionally, it is not murder. As per the 6th commandment, you're protecting yourself. You're protecting your family. It's at night. The people are home in bed. The thief must know this. The Lord is saying that there's a real possibility of real harm to yourself or to your family. So the owner kills the thief. The owner is not guilty. And that's what the phrase means when we read, no blood guiltiness will be upon him. But God is not saying always kill the thief breaking in at night, or always using violence. God is not saying violence is always allowed in self-protection. What God is saying, seemingly, is that we have a right to defend ourselves, to defend our family. But on the other hand, if the thief is breaking in during the day and he's killed by the owner is guilty. He's guilty of intentional killing. And I would imagine something like this would probably go before a court to decide, yeah, it was intentional killing, but was it really murder? In terms of premeditation murder, it wasn't premeditated. Now, I think Dennis Prager has some excellent thoughts on this as we take a look into his commentary, The Rational Bible Exodus. And he talks about a thief who intrudes at this time, particularly if not armed, is not assumed to have homicidal intent. In other words, during the day. One who is not in physical danger and who kills such a thief is therefore charged with killing. Now, as Nahum Sarna says in the JPS Torah commentary, and Prager is quoting him, the biblical scales give priority to the protection of life, even the life of a burglar, over the protection of property. All of this, of course, is based on individual circumstance. A daytime intruder who is armed and obviously willing to murder should be confronted, and if necessarily, killed. So it's almost like saying that Yahweh is saying life is more important than property. The thief is probably not threatening to kill you or your family as he comes in during the day. He can be seen. The thief's assumption is probably there's no one home. Don't harm the thief. Avoid violence. Give the thief the benefit of the doubt and preserve life. Once again, we see Yahweh's focus, the Lord's focus, on the ultimate sanctity of human life. We saw this previously in Lesson 52. We're reminded of this in God's own words as we take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 19. Very famous verse. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants. So once again, as we put these words in their historical context, take a look at the ancient Near East law codes, like the Law of Hammurabi. It was 282 laws written in 1754 BC. Matter of fact, in the commentary section of this podcast, so before you actually hit the play button for this podcast. Below that, there's a commentary section that you could access. And in there, I actually have the Hammurabi Stela, which means it's a carved, tall stone. And that's the Code of Hammurabi that has his 282 laws on it that was actually carved back in the 18th century BC. So this is 300 years before the Exodus, and Hammurabi's code says all thieves will be executed. But Torah, God's instruction, comes against this big time. It's a huge advancement over the pagan world. Just like Torah completely changed the ideas of slavery. I recommend that you take a look at Exodus lesson 49, parts 1 and 2. God's instruction, his Torah, focuses on the great sanctity of the preservation of life. So again, we have the great principle, the sixth commandment, do not murder. But it needs more than just that phrase. It's like this situation of a thief breaking in at night or breaking in during the day. Also in the commentary section, I've linked you to a great article that talks about the Bible and self-defense. I believe it'll definitely add to your understanding as you are looking at these concepts of self-defense, conceal and carry. State of Minnesota, we have the law about conceal and carry. You can buy a pistol, you can buy a weapon, a gun. You can walk around, conceal and carry. And there are laws about protecting oneself, actually using a gun. What is key, though, is the Bible never comes against self-defense. We'll see this. We see this in this situation, but the focus of Torah is life and the preservation of life. So we noted in verse 3 where it says, but if the sun has risen on him, the thief, there will be no blood guiltiness on his account. But if the sun has risen on him, on the thief, there will be blood guiltiness on his account. In other words, the owner who actually killed the thief. So we have that ultimate preservation of life. And this is what God is saying. Now the thief, if he's caught, must make restitution, or he's sold if he has no money to pay back. The implication is the thief is going to be like an indentured servant. This again can be found in Exodus 49 options 1 and 2. Exodus lesson 49, episode 49 in the podcast series, parts 1 and 2. Not a slave, but an indentured servant. So the thief is unwillingly caught. So if the thief is unwillingly caught, as we read in verse 3, in verse 4, the thief must pay double. What's fascinating is when a thief gives up. In other words, he's going to get caught, he surrenders willingly, and he repents. This case is in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 1 through 7. In reading here, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, when a person sins and acts unfaithfully against the Lord, and deceives his companion in regard to a deposit or a security entrusted to him, or through robbery, or if he has extorted from his companion, or has found what was lost and lied about it and sworn falsely, so that he sins in regard to any one of the things a man may do, then it shall be, when he sins and becomes guilty, that he shall restore what he took by robbery, or what he got by extortion, or the deposit which was entrusted to him, or the lost thing which he found, or anything about which he swore falsely. He shall make restitution for it in full, and add 1/5 more, 120%. He shall give it to the one to whom it belongs on the day he presents his guilt offering. So here again, it's the guilt offering. And the guilt offering issue is that somebody knows that they're guilty. And that implies that the thief knows he's guilty, gave up himself willingly to seek, obviously, salvation, to be cleansed from his sin. He has to make restitution, but not double. He pays 120%. In other words, he has to pay it all back plus a fifth. He doesn't have to pay double, not 200%. That's if a thief is caught unwillingly. Now, just as an aside, I want to go back to something because there's a difference here. Back in verse 1 of chapter 22, we read that if a man steals an ox or a sheep, okay, and he does something more, he slaughters it or sells it, he must pay 5 for one for an ox or 4 for one for a sheep. This is not 200% if he's caught. And again, with regards to the rabbinic, Orthodox rabbinic commentary in the Chumash, or Dr. John Careed's excellent Torah commentary in the book of Exodus on this verse, if it's 5 for one for an ox or 4 for one for a sheep, it's a theory, it's an assumption, and the assumption is the reason why you pay more for an ox is more valuable because you might be using it for carting goods or actually plowing a field where a sheep doesn't have that value. So an ox is more valuable in terms of a person's livelihood. Now, the man steals an ox or a sheep, slaughters it or sells it. This is more than stealing. The stealing is you steal an ox, you're going to keep it for yourself. But here the thief murdered the animal, maybe for meat, or sold them for a profit. They're gone forever. And just as an idea, all of a sudden we're focusing in on animals. The Torah really cares about animals. Now, let's take a look at this situation about a thief who steals an ox or a sheep. Let's take it into, I'll give you relate it to me. I have a beautiful new dog, a golden doodle. Her name's Batya. She's gorgeous. So loving. What a buddy. Let's say she's stolen. Now, I'm going to have sorrow. She's stolen. But let's say she's found alive. And I'm going to have great joy that will overcome the sorrow that I had. But if she was stolen and killed and her body is found, my sorrow is going to be even deeper as it's related to knowing that she was stolen. The penalty for killing my dog is more severe in the Torah. It's like, again, the penalty in verse 1 for stealing an ox, stealing a sheep, and it goes bigger than that because now you're killing. Again, the Torah focuses on life. The Torah holds up the sanctity of life, and even for an animal. Matter of fact, when we take a look at the 10 Commandments in the law of the Sabbath, the law of Shabbat, this is in Exodus 20, verse 10, even animals must cease their labors. God is concerned about the donkey and the ox and the horse, your dog. Let him be free that day. Let him be a dog. Let him be an ox and a donkey. They don't have to labor in the farm or in the plowing the fields or in hauling, supplies. They can actually relax and have a good day by ceasing their work. Now, with regards to this, Prager brings up a very interesting question. And the question is, the thief is caught and he has to pay double. And you say, okay, why 200%? Now, first, I want to get into the Hebrew. So I'm in verse 4, and the end of verse 4 basically says that the thief who was caught unwillingly has to pay double. The Hebrew is really cool because the phrase to, or the verb to pay back, the verb is shalem. And in the Hebrew, what you have is a very unique construction. It says shalem ve shalem. Pay back and to pay back. In other words, pay back once, pay back double. By the way, you can take a look at the Strong's number for shalem. It's H7999. It's the base verb root for shalom. Shalom basically means to be whole, sound, safe, living comfortably in peace, to be complete. And we have the double use of the verb shalem. So in other words, you're going to pay and you're going to pay. You're going to pay double. So this word shalem is also used to means to pay, to return, or the restitution. Well, that makes sense. Think about it. If the main picture, the main concept of the word shalem means to be whole, or to be sound, or to be complete, if a thief stole from you, your possessions now are incomplete. You're missing something. You're not whole anymore. So the thief must shalem. He must complete. He must make whole. In other words, he must make restitution. That's the first idea. Remember, Dennis Prager said, why 200%? Well, the first thing I want to bring up is that phrase in Hebrew. We miss it. We don't see really how cool it is in the Hebrew. Shalem ve shalem. It's such a cool picture. Now, the second piece of this, in terms of Dennis Prager's question, God commands it, first of all. Okay, 200%. Why? But again, why double? Why shalem ve shalem? The rabbis offer an opinion. Now, they don't state it as an opinion. They state it as an absolute. This is the way you do it. Now, this is a grave error, you guys, because the Bible, basically, in terms of, you'll see what I mean here, in terms of the rabbinic opinion, the rabbinic opinion, the way it's stated as an absolute, and the Bible doesn't say it that way. And there are many non-Jewish, Gentile Messianics who are in the Messianic movement. They're so enraptured with the rabbis and rabbinical teaching and the Midrash. And for examples, the rabbis say Joshua, he set up the seats in the synagogue at Sinai for Moses and the elders. You guys, there was no synagogue at Sinai. And they taught it as if it was true. Synagogues appear about the 6th century BC. The Exodus was in the 15th century BC. And I've actually heard non-Jewish Gentile Messianics say, well, it's got to be true because the rabbi said it. It's got to be true because the rabbi said it? They're just men. So, as we've seen many times before, these men, they basically are saying their way, go their way or the highway. And many times, it's just like in this thing about Joshua setting up the seats at the synagogue, before or after the Lord gave the 10 Commandments. It's just unbiblical. Now, this is a clear example. Okay, they offer their view on why pay double. So reading the Orthodox rabbinic commentary on this verse, they talk about shalem ve shalem, and they say this double expression indicates that in addition to paying for the theft, the thief must pay as well for any damage he may have caused. You guys, it doesn't say that. Certainly he's making restitution. He took something. But the rabbis are saying it means for any damage caused. What if there's no damage caused? Why should he pay double? It doesn't make sense. Now, better is to say, if the rabbis are going to actually write about this and offer their opinion, they might say the double expression seems to indicate that in addition to paying for the theft, in other words, returning what they stole, could it be that the thief might have to pay for any damage that was caused? In other words, not state it as an absolute, but to state it as a possibility. Now that's interesting, and I disagree with that view, because like I said, what if there's no damage? Then the thief doesn't have to pay double, but God said you're going to pay double, period. God doesn't say it's because it's damage. Now, Dennis Prager mentions a great Jewish scholar, I forget his name right now, and this Jewish scholar, he had an opinion, he had a view, and he doesn't state it like Orthodox rabbis do and say, I'm an Orthodox rabbi, so therefore I have an opinion and therefore it's law. Now for me, this Jewish scholar, he talks about paying double, shalem ve-shalem. And he said, well, first, it's obvious to restore what was originally taken. That's obvious. Anybody would say that makes sense. It's good restitution. But then he says, the other half, the second, is perhaps a penalty for doing a sinful act, doing something immoral. This Torah scholar says, it implies that the Torah says there are two components to sin. Now this really hit me. It really makes sense. Sin has two components. One component is someone is hurt, and second of all, that the act itself is sin. It's immoral. Now today, you think about all the shoplifting that has gone on in these high-end stores, both in New York and California and Chicago, where thieves are breaking in. Shoplifters, kids. The store is a rich store. It's a store of the elite. They're stealing from the rich. Who gets hurt? Or you're in a really swanky hotel and you're stealing their ashtrays or steal their hairdryer or their bathrobe. Again, who's getting hurt? The hotel is rich and profitable. They're expecting people to take these things. No big deal. But again, the Torah says there are two components to sin. First, the act is wrong, and someone gets hurt. The double aspect to sin. Now, even if no one gets hurt, the act is immoral, it is still sin. But is it the case that when a sin is committed and someone doesn't get hurt, but in actuality there is someone that gets hurt? Let's take a look at this example. Suppose a man and a woman get married in an open marriage. In other words, they agree that they can freely engage in sex with others outside of marriage. And they both agree to this. Who's hurt? The husband? The wife? Neither. They both agree, right? So what's the big deal? No. The act is adultery. The act is immoral. The act is sin, regardless of whether the husband or the wife is hurt or not in the fact of this open marriage. But when we look at God's Bible, not just the Torah, but the entire Bible, God indicates that the sinner is hurt. So you have the husband and wife in an open marriage. They both agree. Okay to have an open marriage. But someone is hurt. The one committing adultery. the husband or the wife or both. The immoral act hurts the sinner. Jesus verifies this. He's teaching Torah. You can read about this in Mark chapter 2, verse 17. Jesus here says sinners are sick and they need healing. A person who sins is hurt spiritually. So let's go on in our study of the Mishpatim, the judgments that began in Exodus 21. Let's read Exodus 22, starting in verses 5 through 8. If a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed bare and lets his animal loose so that it grazes in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If a fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes so that stacked grain or the standing grain or the field itself is consumed, he who started the fire shall surely make restitution. If a man gives his neighbor money or goods to keep for him, and it is stolen from the man's house, if the thief is caught, he shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges to determine whether he laid his hands on his neighbor's property. Now, the judgments here are pretty common sense. We had in verse 5 that a man knowingly let his animal loose in another one's field. And the other one is somebody actually started a fire and it actually burnt somebody's standing grain or their field. And that man has to make restitution. I think the small point is with regards to the animals that are grazing in somebody else's vineyard or field, the animals aren't to blame. They're simply doing what animals are supposed to do, graze. So someone starts a fire, like in verse 6, burns up someone's crop. Makes sense. He who started the fire must make it right. Now we get to verses 7 through 8, where you actually are holding on for a friend some valuables. And it's an interesting case. It could be you're watching their car while they're gone on vacation, or they said, hey, keep this valuable jewelry for me. Now, you're doing that, and then someone robs you and takes your friend's stuff. Now, notice, if the thief is caught, the implication is the thief is caught unwillingly. He has to pay double. But remember, go back to Leviticus 6, verses 1 through 7, and we read that. If the thief knows he's guilty and he willingly gives himself up and he wishes to be forgiven of his sin, his payback is only what he stole plus 1/5, 120%. But what if the thief isn't caught? So you were holding on to your friend's goods, to his possessions. The thief came in, stole, and the thief is not caught. So it's your word that's really standing all by itself. You're going to court. And you better have some strong evidence to show that a thief actually broke in and it wasn't you. Let the judges decide if you're telling the truth. Now, there's a very interesting aspect, however, to the Hebrew in verse 8. Verse 8, if the thief is not caught, then the owner of the house shall appear before the judges. In the Hebrew is Ve'nichrav al ha-Elohim. Ve'nichrav al ha-Elohim. To be precise, in other words, a direct translation from the Hebrew, if you're brought before ha-Elohim, Now, the first thing is you could say brought before the God, or brought before the gods, because Elohim is also used for gods, pagan gods. Nahum Sarna in the JPS Torah commentary, he really provides some really good information with regards to this phrase. He says the term, in other words, Ve'nekrav al ha-Elohim, is certainly being used in the legal sense. The accompanying verb is in the plural. So Ve'nekrav means you're dealing with a number of people, not just one. So therefore, the word used here, Elohim, is likely not to have the literal meaning of God. Now let me point out that in Genesis 1:1, where you have in the beginning God created, the Hebrew is Breshit bara Elohim, not ha-Elohim, but Breshit bara. Bara is singular, masculine verb. Elohim is plural. This is just awesome. You have this plural noun and a singular verb, meaning the Elohim created. So it's very important here to see the differences in how the word Elohim can mean God and also judges. This is what the rabbis have interpreted to mean, judges. And here, I agree with the rabbis. It does not mean judges. It can mean judges. So they're brought before God? No. They're brought before perhaps judges, those acting in God's place. It has everything to do with the verb. We're going to take a look at this a little bit further. We go to Exodus 22, verses 9 through 15. For every breach of trust, whether it is for ox, for donkey, for sheep, for clothing, or for any lost thing about which one says, this is it, the case of both parties shall come before the judges, there it is the phrase again, and he whom the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man gives his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep for him, and it dies, or is hurt, or is driven away while no one is looking, an oath before the Lord shall be made by the two of them, that he has not laid hands on his neighbor's property, and its owner shall accept it and shall not make restitution. But if it is actually stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it is all torn to pieces, let him bring it as evidence. He shall not make restitution for what has been torn to pieces. If a man borrows anything from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while its owner is not with it, he shall make full restitution. If its owner is with it, he shall not make restitution. If it is hired, it came for its hire. Now, all of this, in terms of these judgments, these laws here, are pretty clear. But we have that phrase again, and I want to return to that. They came before the judges. They're brought before the Ha-Elohim. Now, what I want to do is to say, I really believe the Orthodox rabbinical point of view makes a lot of sense, but I don't like the way the rabbis teach it. The rabbis teach it that says this means judges. No, it doesn't. However, if they said it really seems like God means judges, I would agree with that. You have to be careful on your language. Now, God is the ultimate righteous judge, period. You can read this in Genesis 31:55. 31:53. Or in Psalm 7, verse 11. Or Psalm 75, verse 7. So, God, wants Israel to appoint men as judges, and then there's a different word for judges that is actually used, to judge and decide justly and righteously. You can take a look at this in Deuteronomy 16, verse 18. they are going to be judging just like Yahweh, justly and righteously, just like the Lord. So in other words, the idea that phrase again, Ve'nikrav al Ha Elohim, brought before Ha Elohim, brought before those who've actually been picked to act as God in legal cases, in the legal court. They're acting in God's place. Now, this is really cool when we take a look at what's happening today. We take a look at our own courts. We take a look at the Fifth Circuit or the Ninth Circuit or the Supreme Court. Are our judges acting and saying, I want to judge correctly and righteously as God would? Very, very, very interesting. Another thing that Torah is saying is accidents happen. You take a look at verse 13. In other words, you had an animal that's torn to pieces. In other words, it was in your care. So one's going to bring evidence to the fact that it was torn to pieces. And the person that was caring for someone else's animal is not going to be held guilty. Accidents happen. No one's to blame. Sometimes far different from the way that our culture operates, where it talks about there is someone always has to be blamed in all situations. Well, as we end off, we are seeing that we have heard Yahweh, the Lord, teach Moses on Sinai the Mishpatim. This started in Exodus 21. In the New American Standard, it says, these are the ordinances of the Lord, the Mishpatim. Procedures, laws, ordinances. Now this again happens after the 10 Commandments, the 10 great principles. And we've learned some critical details that flush out, do not murder, and flush out, do not steal. So we can see and understand in a deeper and more enhanced way what God is getting at. Now, for instance, there are some who say that the 6th commandment says do not kill. It doesn't say that. In Hebrew it says do not murder, but there are people who say, oh no, my King James Version says do not kill. Sorry, that's a mistranslation. And based upon the fact that they say the commandment says do not kill, they might make a stand against killing a thief. Any killing a thief. They might make a stand against war itself, or self-defense, or conceal and carry. Remember, God said if a thief broke in at night and you kill him, you're not guilty. But there are people who actually have misinterpreted the 6th commandment. Now there's the great principle, do not murder. It's premeditated and intentional killing. So God lays out his laws on conceal and carry. If we killed a thief in our own house at night, it is not murder. God is showing us that we have to defend ourselves, but the Lord again shows his stand on his stance on the extreme sanctity of life. Don't kill a thief in our house during the day. He came to steal, not hurt anyone. Probably came in assuming no one's home. Let the thief escape. Do him no harm. We haven't got the right to kill him. It's just so cool how up to date God's Torah is after 3,400 years. Yes, we can defend our family. We can defend ourselves, but avoid killing. Avoid violence at all costs. Because again, we come back to Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. And at the end of that verse it says, so choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants. So I'll see you in episode 54. And we're going to be only dealing with one verse, Exodus 22:16. It is such a critical verse. In all of the mishpatim, all the ordinances that we're seeing in Exodus 21 and 22. And it answers the question, is premarital sex a sin? Where premarital sex, technically speaking, is not addressed anywhere in the Bible. Oh, just wait. This is going to be a critical podcast. And we'll remember in Luke 24:50 that Jesus lifted up his hands to bless his 120 disciples before he ascended to the Father, just like the high priest daily lifts up his hands. It could very well be that Jesus blessed them with the Aaronic blessing. I've taken the Aaronic blessing and I've turned it into a prayer. And I'd like to end our session with that blessing that's based upon the high priestly blessing that God gave to Moses, to Aaron, to bless the people. Yevarekenu Adonai vishmarkenu, Yair Adonai panav aleinu vekunekenu, Yisa Adonai panav aleinu v'yasem lanu shalom, V'shem Yeshua Adonenu, Amen. So together, let's say this in English. May the Lord bless us and keep us. May the Lord make his face to shine upon us and be gracious to us. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon us, and may he give us his shalom. In the name of Jesus, our Lord. Amen.